I'll let my parents live in this house. You can't even cook, so leave LOL. Mark came up to me with a smile as if he was saying I did it, and said something so outrageous that I was left speechless. There is no way that I would allow them to live in my house and then try to move in with my in-laws without my permission, and try to evict me, the owner of the house. I'd been taken aback by Mark's controlling nature for a while, but now it feels almost sickening. I just can't go on with Mark anymore. Feeling this way, I decided I would make Mark pay. My name is Sarah, a housewife in my 40s. I live with my husband, Mark. Mark is what you'd call a house husband, and while he doesn't work, he takes care of the household chores that I can't manage because I'm working. In return, I go out and work to bring in the money we need to live. All of this is to lead a stable life with Mark, but all my efforts seem to be in vain. Mark has a pretty domineering personality. It's not that I think there's anything wrong with being a stay-at-home husband, or that men should work, but even though he's not working, he behaves as if he's the man of the house and protects it. I'm so tired today. I want some ice cream. Go buy it for me. Out of the blue, he'd say something like that when relaxing in the living room at 11 p.m. The convenience store isn't too far away, but I had a tough day at work and was exhausted, so I was irritated by his entitled attitude. Why don't you go get it yourself? It's just a short walk to the store. I replied in a colder tone than I intended. That's how much Mark's behavior annoyed me. However, when I refused, Mark chuckled and said, "You think that's how you should behave? You never know what'll happen if you upset your husband." Mark has always been the kind who would say things like, "I'm the man of this house, and I protect it, so you need to respect that." Honestly, I'm frustrated with Mark acting superior and expecting respect just because he's the husband, even though he doesn't work. Every time he behaves this way, I feel tormented and don't want to engage with him. At that moment, I thought if I continued dealing with Mark on top of my already stressful job, my stress would become unbearable. So I said, "I'm really tired, I'm sorry. I'm going to rest in my room." But Mark didn't seem to like my attitude and stopped me, saying, "Wait. What's with that attitude towards your husband? I could kick you out right now if I wanted to. Do you think it's all right to upset your spouse like that?" He looked angry. Who does he think he's kidding, acting like the boss when he doesn't even work? He can upset me whenever he wants, but heaven forbid I upset him. It's just like a child's tantrum. I'm sorry, but I'm really exhausted. Please understand. I didn't even want to talk anymore, so I said that with a forced smile. Mark sighed deeply and muttered, "You're such a disappointment as a wife." At this point, I didn't have the energy to argue, so I just said I'm sorry again, and retreated to my room. Day by day, I was worn down by Mark's overbearing behavior. But I didn't have the energy to confront him about it. That's how exhausted I was. Then one day, I caught a bad cold. The doctor said it was stress-induced fever, and the first thing that came to my mind was Mark. I was so sick that I couldn't move, so of course, I took a day off from work and could only lie down in my bed. When I told Mark about my condition, he snapped, "A cold? That's just an excuse. Go to work, you're useless." His words seemed to make my fever spike even higher. Moreover, he added, "I won't be taking care of you. This is your mess, deal with it." So I was left alone in my room, moaning from the fever. There were no ice packs or anything. I was too weak to prepare anything for myself, and I didn't want to face Mark again for fear of more verbal abuse. My temperature reached 103 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was so high that my body was so overcome with sweat that I could not even get up to change my clothes, even when they were wet. I thought, how much easier would it be if I could just pass away? With these farts, I endured a painful night alone. Maybe it was the fever, but I couldn't sleep at all. Even when the sun set and it was time to see the night sky, feelings of loneliness and doubt if this was all right overwhelmed me, and it was unbearable. I actually wanted Mark to help. Not necessarily to bring down my fever or anything. I just wanted him to get me an ice pack, bring a cold compress, and say, "Are you okay?" But that was just a fantasy I had. The words I actually received tore at my heart, leading to new anxieties that tormented me. Why must I be the only one to feel this way? What did I do wrong? Why can't things go well with Mark? Once these farts started, I couldn't stop the tears. It was just so painful. After about 3 days of rest, my fever finally subsided, and I was able to return to work. My colleagues and bosses were concerned, asking, "Are you sure you're all right?" But my health was improving, and more than anything, I had to support the household. When I mentioned that I couldn't afford to take more time off, they seemed even more worried. Their kindness, which was so much more than the attitude I received from Mark, brought tears to my eyes. I guess my emotional breaking point was close. A voice inside me was screaming that I couldn't deal with Mark any longer. I was ignoring that, pushing myself too hard. This way of life wouldn't last forever. Someday I'd reach my limit and wouldn't be able to get back up. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I know that, but that didn't mean I could even have the presence of mind to deal with the situation before I reached my limit or to do so. By this time, my affection for Mark had already faded. But I didn't have the room to think about starting preparations to live our separate lives. How could I clear these feelings? With these worries, I worked hard every day, came home exhausted, and was swung around by Mark's whims. I lived such days every day. One day, while relaxing in my room, Mark called out, "I have something important to discuss. Come here." It had been a long time since we had a serious talk. Usually, Mark wouldn't inform me about various things and would make significant decisions on his own. So, with a sinking feeling, I wondered what this was about. As I sat down for the discussion, Mark, with an excitement I'd never seen before, said, "I'll let my parents live in this house. You can't even cook, so leave LOL." The first word that slipped out was, "What?" "You need to leave because you're living with my in-laws." I couldn't accept the reality due to his utterly selfish remarks. But regardless of how I felt, Mark continued to push the conversation forward. He wanted to change the name on the deed so that this house belongs to him and his parents. He wanted to divorce me and start a new family. He stated that this was already decided and that nothing I said would change that. I felt dizzy at the decisions made without considering my feelings. When I brought up the idea of living together, my parents were happy. They must have missed me. I need to be there for them since I'm the man of the house. Mark, who was full of himself with the term man of the house, could only think of his own needs. There was no way I could continue with Mark anymore. My heart told me it was absolutely impossible. Oblivious to my feelings, Mark chuckled. "You love me so much, don't you? I know it's shocking to hear this from the husband you love so much. But I'm sorry, I just want to take care of my family. Please understand." Mark spoke in a tone as if he was admonishing me. But I wanted to retort, "That's not true at all." I didn't have a shred of affection left for Mark. What was left was my disbelief at Mark's overly selfish actions, and my regret for not cutting ties with him sooner. Why didn't I end things with him much earlier? If I had done these earlier, Mark would not have taken advantage of me so much, and he would not have been so selfish and arrogant. I even despised my past self for being too weak and not having the guts to let Mark go, thinking I was too overwhelmed. Mark seemed to misunderstand, thinking I loved him too much and didn't want a divorce. Of course, that was far from the truth, because my feelings for Mark had cooled a long time ago. All that remained was disgust for Mark, who seemed to think I still cared for him despite his actions. To make my feelings clear, I spoke up. "I'll leave then." At those words, Mark exclaimed, "What?" He probably didn't expect me to agree to a divorce and to leave so easily. He should brace himself. Mark's in for a rough time ahead. And the foolish me who used to bail Mark out is a thing of the past. From now on, no matter what happens to Mark, I won't help him. Because we won't be a couple anymore. Seeing my determination, Mark looked shocked and frozen in place. I took this opportunity to head to my room and pack the essentials. I won't be able to take larger items today, so I'd probably need to hire movers later. As I was heading out, Mark approached hurriedly and said, "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers." I replied with a smile. "I've already fallen out of love with you. I feel so much lighter letting go of what's not needed." Hearing this, Mark stood there, looking lost. I gave a nod, saying thanks for everything, and left the house. Mark had a worried look on his face. Then, I went back to my parents' place and explained everything. My parents were furious with Mark's behavior, ready to give him a piece of their mind. But once they learned I had a plan, they calmed down. I began to recuperate at my parents' while handling various matters. First was the divorce. After sending the divorce papers, I received a message from Mark. "Are you sure about this? I don't know if it's really a good thing, but I don't have any feelings for you Ichi anymore, and if we've gone this far and he says there's no divorce, that would be a problem. I feel so much better now that you're gone. So fill out the divorce papers quickly." When I sent him that message, there was no reply. A few days later, I received divorce papers with the sections Mark was supposed to fill out already completed. I quickly filled in my parts and submitted them to the county office the same day. Now, Mark and I are complete strangers. I no longer need to support the household as Mark's wife. During the divorce process, we also split our assets. As Mark declared, the house became his, so I changed the ownership to his name and decided to give it up. From the beginning, we got this house because Mark was insistent, saying I want this house. It wasn't really comfortable for me anyway, so it was just a burden to me. Instead, I decided to get alimony from Mark. Since Mark isn't working, his parents covered it, but it seems he's actively job hunting now, probably planning to pay them back once he gets a decent job. But reality doesn't always go as planned. A month passed since the divorce was finalized, and I moved out of my parents' home into a new one, living a peaceful life. Then, I got a call from Mark. Honestly, I found it annoying. I immediately figured out why Mark was calling. But ignoring him might lead to more problems. I'd have to talk to him sooner or later, so I decided to deal with it now for my own future's sake. "Hello. What do you want after all this time?" I was utterly fed up with dealing with Mark. I wanted him to hurry up and finish whatever he had to say. As I reluctantly answered the phone, he pleaded, "Please help me." His desperate tone made me laugh. I expected Mark to be in a tough situation, but I never imagined it to be this bad. "Well, what happened?" "LOL, you have to tell me or I won't know." "LOL. I actually had a hunch about why Mark was in such a mess, but I wanted him to spell it out. When I pressed him, Mark hesitantly began to explain, stumbling over his words occasionally. He had taken over the house from me and lived there just fine for a month. But recently, he had to pay the rent. Since Mark was still unemployed, and I was surely able to cover the expenses with my own earnings, he decided to ask my former parents-in-law, who were living on a pension, to put up the payment for him. But the amount on the bill was much more than they expected. It was around $1,800. There was no way the retired in-laws, living off their pensions, could afford that. My former in-laws were furious, saying, "This is not what we heard." They were furious and blamed Mark terribly. Lost and unsure of what to do, Mark called me in tears, asking for help. I had no idea the rent was so high. "The place is a mess now. What are you going to do about it?" Mark was now blaming me, in frustration. Sure, it was my mistake for not mentioning the rent beforehand, but it was Mark's foolishness for trying to take over the house without even knowing the monthly cost. You could say he brought it upon himself. He treated me like an outsider and pushed me away. And now, this was the outcome. Despite the results of his own actions, he couldn't accept it and instead reached out to me for help. I couldn't help but sigh at his audacity. But, without paying attention to how I felt, Mark continued, "Please, I need your help. We can't go on like this. I need you." The urgency in Mark's voice reflected their dire situation. Surely, they must be feeling really cornered right now. I'm pretty sure the rent due date has already passed, so they might already be behind on the rent. The owner of that house is short-tempered and would not tolerate even a month's delay in rent payment. I remembered being told multiple times when I rented the house, never be late on the rent. If they've missed a payment, they're in for a rough time from the owner. Mark has met the landlord once or twice, so he knows all too well how intimidating they can be. Messing with them could be irreparable. So, he was probably desperate when he called me for help. "Please, just cover the rent for 1 month. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right? If someone you care about is in trouble, you should help them out," Mark said, still acting selfishly. What love? My feelings for you have long since faded. I wanted to say those words to him, but I held back and said, I'm sorry, but don't I have any obligation to help you? It was Mark who cut me off, wasn't it? But you want me to help you when you're in trouble. Don't you think that's too convenient? I coldly replied. It was a genuine sentiment, no pretense. That's how much feelings of frustration and despair towards Mark welled up inside me. Yet Mark defended himself. Please, don't be so cold. I really can't do this without you. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We used to be married, right? Can't you help me out just this once? No. You were the one who left me. And even before all that happened, my feelings for you had already cooled. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you. When I said that, I could hear Mark's dejected voice on the other end of the phone. I can't believe it. For so long, I endured everything. Even when Mark acted selfishly, or took me for granted, or treated me poorly when I was sick, I stayed by his side, trying to make our marriage work. I worked hard for the life we had together. And this was the result. Why didn't I leave sooner when my love for him faded? Why didn't I distance myself from Mark earlier? These regrets were flooding in, along with the anger I felt towards him. Mark never truly faced me. He never showed concern for me, never tried to protect me, and never considered walking through life hand in hand as a couple. All this time, he's treated me like a mere maid, like a machine just to bring in money. Every time he acted that way, he was oblivious to my despair. Yet, even though all this is a result of Mark's doing, he comes pleading for help as if to say, I'm the victim here. His attitude seems so self-centered that it's off-putting. Please, help me. I'm begging you. How about we get married again? This time we'll start over properly. I promise I'll never kick you out again. I couldn't help but chuckle at Mark's desperate proposal. Remarry to you? Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your own actions. I have been trying to work with you in my own way for a long time. I kept trying to make you face me. Now you're telling me to start all over again with you, pretending that all of that never happened. Do you want me to go back to those hellish days? That would never happen. I'm not going back to that life no matter what. I got so worked up that tears began to flow. I couldn't tell if they were from anger or sadness. Mark said nothing in response to my words. Unable to bear any more of this conversation, I simply said goodbye and hung up. Mark didn't call after that, and wanting never to hear his voice again, I blocked his number. I later heard from mutual friends that Mark and his family got evicted from their home. Mark, in his own way, tried to talk to my former in-laws and somehow get them to pay the rent on his behalf, but they were furious and said, that's not what we talked about, and refused to pay the rent. As a result, they upset the landlord and had no choice but to leave. Mark hasn't had much luck finding a full-time job, so he's working part-time to make ends meet. Apparently, because they had been living together, the in-laws had to sell their house and are now cramped in a run-down apartment, all three of them. As for me, I've been so engrossed in my work that my boss discussed a promotion with me. It seems I might be the first female manager in our company, and I've received looks of admiration from both colleagues and juniors. Sometimes friends ask, aren't you going to get married? To be honest, after being forced into that kind of life, I have quite a negative image of marriage. The idea of dating a man or getting married again doesn't appeal to me. But life is long, and there's no need to rush. In this generation, many people go their entire lives without getting married. If I can live my life without regrets, that's all that matters. If I can live true to myself, that's enough. With that in mind, I want to continue walking through life at my own pace. Her surgery is done. How long is it taking for you to get her change of clothes and other necessities? At least call and let us know. From behind my husband's voice, I could hear my daughter-in-law shouting, but it was too late. Hey, I'll buy things like underwear at the hospital store. Please don't go through my drawers. Ever since we got married, my husband hasn't been too keen on visiting my parents' house. Maybe because of that, my daughter-in-law seems reluctant to visit too. On top of that, her child and my daughter's child, meaning my grandkids, are the same age. Whenever my daughter visits our home, my daughter-in-law always seems to be in competition. It's quite a daily hassle. I live with my slightly older husband and our son's family. My daughter-in-law was suddenly struck with stomach pain and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Fortunately, it was just appendicitis, so her life isn't in danger. My husband and grandchild came to the hospital. Once my son arrived there too, I headed back home to prepare for her hospital stay. "I'm sorry, but I'll visit the hospital again tomorrow," I informed them, leading to a shocking turn of events. Marriage is indeed a connection between two families, so it's bound to be challenging. But I believe that is one of the many things that comes with marriage. I can't forgive someone who arbitrarily cuts off that connection and tries to hide it. In the times of old, like during the American Civil War era, that would be grounds for a duel. Or so I sometimes dramatically think. I told them that I wouldn't be visiting the hospital the day my daughter-in-law was admitted, but would go the next day. Some emotional preparation is indeed necessary. Well, let's make them brace for my visit. My name is Sharon. I'm 62 years old and work as a freelance funeral director. Lately, funerals are scheduled regardless of certain old superstitions, like specific unlucky days. There are variations depending on different religious denominations, so it's quite a demanding job. But it's a job that someone has to do. That's why I do it with pride. I met my husband through work. Unlike the youngsters these days, I didn't ponder much about a partner's income or profession. After graduating from a community college, I married and had kids in quick succession. Back then, I thought that was just how things were. Now, I'm working and can support myself. Unless I'm head over heels in love, I sometimes wonder if marriage is necessary. My husband is very much of the baby boomer generation, thinking they were the ones who rebuilt America after the wars. I joke, saying, "You weren't even born then, were you?" Maybe because of that, he never helps around the house. Nowadays, men who can cook are seen as attractive though. Even during the times when we had to care for my husband's parents, he never helped, not even a word of appreciation. So, when my in-laws passed away, I had considered divorcing him. However, after living together for so many years, it's not like there's no affection at all. Now that he's retired, he lives a relaxed and comfortable life. I felt he had mellowed down a bit in his attitude. Well, at least that's what I thought until my daughter-in-law came into our lives. My husband doesn't have much of what you'd call hobbies, but he's taken up saying things like "I want to live a long, healthy life," and has started visiting the local library. He mentioned that reading stimulates the brain, and since the library has books from various genres, walking around searching for them also helps strengthen the legs. But it feels like he borrowed novels and other books only in the beginning. Now, I can only imagine him dozing off in the library chairs. On top of that, he doesn't help at all with house chores, so juggling that with my job was quite a burden. But thankfully, my son and his wife have moved in with us, and it's been a great help. My daughter-in-law is a stay-at-home mom, so she's been a real godsend helping with house chores. They got married 3 years ago and have a 2-year-old boy. My grandson is so adorable, I can't help but spoil him, which often gets me scolded. There have been minor issues here and there, but I imagine these days would last for long. I also have a daughter. She's 2 years younger than her elder brother. She's the same age as my daughter-in-law, and coincidentally, they gave birth around the same time. My daughter lives nearby and drops by quite often. Maybe because of that, they always seem to be trying to one-up each other. They seem to argue over whose child is cuter. "Were you visiting again?" "Oh, can't I come to my own parents' house anymore?" I never said that. Tensions rise. Look, the grandkids are playing nicely together. Isn't that good enough? Yes, but we're planning to send ours to a preschool program next year. Preschool? What's that? Oh, what a coincidence. We're planning to do the same for our child. You too. Isn't it a bit early for preschool? Please, Sharon, stay out of this. Starting at 3 is almost too late, you know. Exactly. Hahaga. Every time, the atmosphere turns like this. My daughter-in-law went back to her room without even making tea. But if they're starting preschool at 3, maybe my daughter won't visit as often. And my daughter-in-law will have more chances to go out, so I felt a bit relieved. But then, my daughter said something odd. "Mom, don't you think he doesn't really look like my brother?" she said, looking closely at her brother's son. "Really? People always say young kids resemble many of their relatives." I didn't think much of my daughter's words at that time. After all, even if they're both my grandkids, I can't help but find the one my daughter gave birth to cuter. Perhaps my daughter-in-law senses that because every time my daughter visits, her mood worsens, and I end up bearing the brunt of it until she feels better. My son once told me he got married to his wife through a friend's introduction. When he was around 35, he was getting a bit anxious, so he asked a friend to set them up. It seems his wife had the same motivation. They wanted to have kids right away after getting married, and started living together because it was convenient for my son's job. The year after they got married, they had a child, and his wife became a stay-at-home mom. She's a typical woman in her 40s who strives to do everything perfectly. She used to do the opposite job of mine. She was a wedding planner. I heard she quit because she wanted to be perfect at parenting. She said she plans to return to work once the kid is a bit older. She's so committed. She once told me she never compromises on household chores. During her single days, she had gotten her share of bridal training. She always decorates with seasonal flowers and is picky about her ingredients. She even changes the scroll in the living room alcove with the seasons. She's a great cook and keeps the house spotless. On the flip side, since she moved in with my son, she won't let me do a thing. "You must be tired from work, Sharon. Please, take a rest." "I'm fine. Just this much. This is my job," she'd say, not even letting me help with the dishes after meals. Moreover, she made various changes in the house, even reorganizing the workflow of household chores. She apparently rearranged the contents of drawers too. She even labeled things so we can immediately know where everything is. My elderly husband found it very convenient and was full of praise, but I felt more and more like it wasn't my home anymore. "Sharon, you put the towels in the wrong place again." "Oh, sorry, old habits." I'd be constantly getting scolded. I wish she'd at least discuss with me before moving things around. My husband, from the baby boomer generation. They say folks from his time like to do things as a group and are sensitive to trends. But my husband wasn't influenced by these tendencies and dislikes being in groups. And of course, he's not into trends. Maybe that's why, but he has always disliked dealing with my family. He has been like that since we got married. These days, they say we live in a century where people can live up to 100 years. There are surveys saying the average lifespan for men is around 81, and for women, it's 87. My father passed away from an illness 2 years ago. He lived slightly longer than average, making it to 83. My mother now lives with my younger sister, who's 3 years younger than me. One day, out of the blue, my husband asked, "Is your mom still, well, alive and kicking?" "Yes, her blood pressure's a bit high, but otherwise, she seems fine." I heard the average lifespan for women is around 87. So, what's your point? How old is your mom now? She's 87. What are you getting at? Guess her time's almost up. You should tell her to be careful. Why bring up such an ill omen? Well, you are a funeral director, after all. With that, he quickly left the room. Suddenly, I was left speechless. All the memories of my life with my husband flashed before my eyes, like how he wasn't supportive in raising our kids, and the caregiving for his parents. His lack of involvement with my family was another. The more I recalled, the more I realized there were countless incidents. I began to feel that there were limits to my life with him. My mom isn't in the best of health, but thankfully, my sister lives with her. My sister is a single career woman. Apparently, they've extended her retirement age, so she plans to work until 65. Lately, I've heard that single people in their 50s and above are increasing, so it's not a rare story. According to a 2020 survey, 1 in 4 men and 1 in 6 women remain unmarried throughout their lives. Maybe it's because my husband doesn't interact with my family, but my daughter-in-law doesn't speak too highly of them either. Your sister is still working, isn't she? Yes, she is. Well, she's single and a very diligent person. So, she must have saved up a lot of money, huh? I wondered what she was trying to get at. My sister's savings have nothing to do with my daughter-in-law. It felt a bit nosy, and I had no clue what my daughter-in-law was trying to say. One day, we gathered at my family home for my father's third memorial. The last time she came, my daughter-in-law made a comment right off the bat, and she did the same this time too. "Doesn't anyone clean out your family house? My mother is old, and my sister is busy with her work. Still, isn't it a bit too messy?" To make matters worse, my husband chimed in. "Once the memorial service is over, let's head back. Enough. Both of you need to stop." Then my sister stepped in. "I did my best to clean. It's Dad's third memorial. Please stay until the end. I beg you." She even went as far as to kneel down. Seeing my sister's gesture, my husband and daughter-in-law finally quieted down, and the situation calmed. The memorial ended without any more issues, but my husband and daughter-in-law left without touching the sandwiches and other food we prepared. My son and I felt terribly sorry toward my mother and sister. When we apologized, they reassured us that they didn't mind, which was comforting. However, I decided never to invite my husband and daughter-in-law to my family home again. My husband has always been stubborn, but he's become even more so since living with our daughter-in-law. Or rather, he seemed to do whatever she says. Then, one day, my daughter came over to our house with her child. There seem to be many children's preschools these days, and they went for a trial. That's what she came to tell us. Her child drew a picture at one of those preschools trial and was praised for it. I couldn't help but express my joy. "Oh, really? That's amazing." Apparently, my daughter-in-law overheard and felt overshadowed. Without saying a word, she left. I couldn't believe it, but she quickly took her child to a preschool trial. She seemingly couldn't stand being outdone. About 2 hours later, she came back and told us that her kid drew a picture and got a praise for it. My daughter-in-law looked visibly exhausted, and I felt bad for the grandchild she seemed to be constantly chasing after. I wondered if she was just overwhelmed. When I said, "That's good," I probably had a tight expression on my face. She then said, "Sharon, you clearly favor your own daughter's child more, don't you?" She made this remark almost dismissively before vanishing into her room. Later, I learned she'd spoken to my husband, who told me, "Don't have your daughter visit so often. She's married off now." I was taken aback by his defensive attitude towards her, and retorted, "It's fine if my daughter wants to come back home once in a while." Yet, he just pretended not to hear and turned his back on me. Just in case, I called my daughter and asked her not to provoke any situations. Then, one day, my daughter-in-law, who always tries her best, complained of severe stomach pain. My grandchild informed me, but she said, "It's nothing serious." I noticed her sweating abnormally and kept urging her to go to the hospital. However, she kept insisting she was fine. I tried getting my husband to convince her, but she remained adamant, saying she'd be fine with a little rest. So, for the first time in a while, I was doing the housework. It was fortunate that I had the day off from work. Later, I heard her groaning in pain, so I finally called an ambulance. I accompanied her, and soon after, my husband and grandchild also arrived at the hospital. Upon reaching, she went straight into surgery. It turned out to be appendicitis, but luckily, it wasn't life-threatening. I contacted my son, and while he was accompanying her, I went back home to prepare some things for her stay. Since my daughter-in-law moved in with us, things have been moved around. Even things I usually kept in a particular spot were moved. First, I found her insurance card and toiletries and packed them in a bag. As I thought about packing some clothes for her, I opened her drawers. While searching, I wondered if she'd be upset if I touched things like her underwear. I had a hard time finding the drawer with her underwear because there was no label on it. I finally found it, and her underwear was neatly arranged. I also noticed a box, about the size of a standard sheet of paper, inside the drawer. It might contain soap or something, I thought, but out of curiosity, I opened it. Inside were shocking photos of my husband and daughter-in-law. There were also some documents. Upon seeing this, I panicked and fled to my parents' place. On my way, my husband called. He said, "Her surgery is done. How long is it taking for you to get her change of clothes and other necessities? At least call and let us know." I quickly replied, "Sorry, I'll visit the hospital tomorrow," and hung up. In the background, I heard my daughter-in-law saying, "Sharon, I can buy my underwear from the hospital's store. Please don't open my drawers." It seemed like a plea from her, but it was too late. I'm out of options now. The photo inside the box showed my husband and daughter-in-law together. What's more, they were pictured with some documents. Both of them held the papers, beaming with joy. The document read, "End of a final relationship notice." It's sometimes referred to as the posthumous divorce notice, but this was the first time I've seen the real thing. This notice is a procedure to end the legal relationship with a deceased spouse's relatives. I've heard that its usage has surged by 2.5 times over the past decade. It seems the primary reason people do this is to ensure they're not buried with their spouse's relatives when they pass. All you have to do is submit the necessary paperwork to the city or town hall of your official domicile. Once it's submitted, it can't be revoked. It's strictly a procedure to sever ties with the deceased spouse's family. There's no time limit for submission, and it can be done anytime after the spouse's death. However, in the case of this posthumous divorce, only the relationship with the spouse's family ends. The marital relationship remains on record. Thus, it's still possible to inherit property. In my line of work, I only wear pearls. That's why I always keep my other jewelry stored away. But shockingly, all of that jewelry was in that box. I wondered when it became the daughter-in-law's property. It could have been my husband's doing. Anyway, it's clear that they were planning to inherit my assets and sever ties with my relatives, presuming I'd pass away first. To think they had such a low opinion of my family. I had even taken care of my husband's parents, yet my husband never lifted a finger or offered a single word of gratitude. Just recalling it fills me with pent-up anger. The day after my daughter-in-law was hospitalized, I confronted them with this document, accompanied by a lawyer. "Why are you coming to the hospital now? Isn't it a bit late?" I had some discussions with the lawyer. "What are you talking about? Consulting a lawyer? I'll be submitting divorce papers," I declared, slamming down the end of a final relationship notice and the photo of my husband and daughter-in-law holding it. "That's why I told you I'd buy my underwear from the hospital store, didn't I?" My daughter-in-law muttered quietly. "Huh. That's not the point, is it? It's not like I'm saying I want to divorce you, right? It's a document that says you want to cut ties with my relatives. It's the same thing." I never received a single word of consolation when taking care of my husband's parents. Even until now, he always hated going to my parents' house and even made my sister apologize on her knees. Things in our home change constantly without notice, making me uncomfortable. My jewelry was even mixed in a box with documents. I finally let out all these grievances that I've kept to myself for so long, and I can't even remember all of them. "Please calm down, Sharon," my daughter-in-law said anxiously. But my son retorted, "What the hell are you doing behind my back? Dad too." Just then, my daughter entered the room. "Oh, you came to visit me." Trying to lighten the mood, my daughter-in-law, always good at putting on a front, forced a smile. "Is it appendicitis? Maybe they should remove some other bad bugs too." "What are you talking about? Ow, ow, ow." Probably not the best topic a day after surgery. I hope her wounds don't get worse. I did my research. "Your child isn't my brother's, is it?" "What? No way. That's impossible. My brother was used by this woman." "I've done my research. My son was lost for words. You had a relationship before meeting my son." We'll let the lawyer explain the rest. Before I came to the hospital, I had called my daughter. She said she had something to tell me, which was surprising. It's not the child's fault, but if it isn't my son's child, that's a different story. Seeing me distraught, my daughter called a lawyer. She left the hospital room with her 2 kids. Naturally, this wasn't a conversation for young ears. My daughter-in-law had been dating someone before she met my son, but that man was already married. Around the time she was considering breaking up with him, she was introduced to my son, and they got married. When she realized she was pregnant, she was in disbelief, meaning she was seeing both the married man and my son. My daughter, noting the child doesn't look like my brother, had a DNA test done. It confirmed they weren't related. She also had a private investigator look into it. Confronted with the facts, my daughter-in-law finally broke down in tears. "It's not what you think. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. But you did. Why can't we just go on as we have? My husband said, who seemed too relaxed about the situation. I'm getting a divorce. Do as you please from now, I said, leaving the room. I didn't say I wanted a divorce, he called after me, but I pretended not to hear. I'll go to my mom's parents' place too. I'll send the divorce papers later. Just when I thought we were living a truly happy life, my daughter-in-law sobbed uncontrollably upon hearing my son's words. She couldn't keep up the facade anymore and cried out loudly. A concerned nurse rushed in. Does the wound hurt? Are you okay? The kind nurse asked. I silently thought to myself, she probably has pain in her emotional wounds. My husband reluctantly filled out the divorce papers. He can't do household chores at all. The daughter-in-law deceived my son and gave birth to another man's child, which has made it awkward for her to return to her parents' house. She apparently also reached out to the married man she dated in the past, but he ignored her and she couldn't get any child support. Such married men are probably dating other single women. In the end, she's living with my ex-husband, but it's tough getting by on his pension alone. Sending the kids to preschool. That's just a pipe dream. The daughter-in-law seems to have resumed her job as a wedding planner. But juggling that with childcare is tough. Moreover, she's still saying she won't sign the divorce papers from my son. I wonder if she thinks that when it comes to taking care of my ex-husband in the future, my kind son will come back to her. Well, life doesn't always go as planned, that's for sure. Maybe she's aiming for a perfect life somewhere. I continue working as a funeral director while living with my mother, sister, and son. My elderly mother seems to be the happiest with the lively household. My son seems a bit wary of marriage, but I hope he'll find someone good again. I often think that if I had separated from my ex-husband when I was younger, maybe I would have had another chance. But I'm trying to make up for it now by being a good daughter. Now I'm talking with my sister, whom I've troubled in the past, about going on a trip together.